today I want to get rid of some books, so we are doing an unhaul. I have 22 books stacked up on the floor next to me, so without further ado, let's run through them. At this point, it's kind of expected that I'm not holding on to this series anymore, and every now and then I look at what I've got left and I'm like, I don't want to keep these, like definitely for sure. And that is the God's Grave and Dark Dawn editions that I've still currently got on my shelves. These are signed to me. I went through a whole phase of being obsessed with this series, but I'm afraid to say I'm just not obsessed with them anymore. Similarly, another popular one that I'm getting rid of is Crooked Kingdom, but before you decide that I am Satan, this is actually a duplicate copy and I won a copy ages ago that is signed by Leigh Bardugo, so I'm keeping that one. I'm getting rid of this one. Keeping on the trend of fantasy, I was in two minds about getting rid of this one, but honestly I've got all of these on audiobook anyway, which is my preferred format for listening to this series, and this book in particular was a 3 stars, and that is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. Honestly, he's a great writer and he writes such gritty, grimdark fantasy, but I don't see any need to keep this. I don't feel any connection to it, so it needs to go. That said though, I am keeping the trilogy, at least for now, so maybe they'll be in another unhaul video down the track, but I have genuinely enjoyed a bunch of them, so I do want to keep A Little Hatred and the trilogy, at least for now. It also saddens me that I want to get rid of a Brandon Sanderson book, which is a middle grade called Alcatraz and the Evil Librarians. I don't think that's the actual title of book 1, and I just found the writing style of this really tedious. I don't know what it is about Sanderson. His humor just sometimes alienates me and I don't like it, and that was the case of this one. I DNF'd this, so I started it and put it down after a few chapters. I just couldn't do it, so this needs to also go. However, it's had a new rebrand with the new cover, so it looks cool, it just isn't my thing. Then at some point, I actually can't remember what month I did it in, but I did a Read It or Unhaul It reading vlog where I tried a bunch of different books that I had on my TBR cart, and I was like, am I gonna enjoy these? Are they worth keeping? And it turned out that for some of them, no, I didn't want to keep them. And one of them is The Vor by Brian Catling. I thought this was going to be an incredibly whimsical fantasy about nature and magic. It's not. It starts out with this guy who is looking at himself in the mirror and he's an old man and he's completely naked. Just the tone of this book completely caught me off guard in not a good way, so it's not staying. Additionally, this one I also want to unhaul, but not for the same reasons, and that is The Ember Blade, and I got this to try Murphy Napier's favorite books, and this is just not for me, honestly. I'm somebody who likes more new age fantasy and I don't like classics either, so when it comes to older books in that genre, I'm not a fan. This one, to be fair, is a fairly new book, but it really falls into that category of older fantasy. And I don't know how to explain it in a more nuanced way than that, but it just wasn't my thing. So I need to not keep it. It's chonky, so it's gotta go. Now I've got a series that brings me a little bit of shame, and this one is on this list because while I didn't dislike the series, I realized that it's such a long series and I'm giving it about 3 stars per book. And if it's a series that's really long, I want to be able to emotionally invest in it more than I have been. And those are the first 2 books in the Kate Daniels series, which is an urban fantasy series following a private investigator or almost mercenary walking the borders of 2 magical factions and trying to solve murders and magical crimes. It sounds really cool, and there was a lot in here that I was genuinely interested in, like the werewolves and the shapeshifters, but ultimately the writing style felt very like early 2000s or even 90s. I don't know, there was just something about the tone of the books that rubbed me the wrong way, but I'm in no means excited to continue, so why would I bother continuing? I DNF'd the 3rd book in the series because I got the audiobook from my library. I don't feel any need to continue buying them, so they need to go as well. This one might be surprising. I actually don't think I've talked about this one in a while, but it stayed on my shelf after I moved house, and I was intending to get rid of it sooner than this, so if it's come up in another video, I'm sorry, but I guess because of my move, I just chucked everything in a box and now it's here. So it is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. I have no need to physically read this again, which is sometimes the criteria for me getting rid of a book. Not always, but for the most part it is. So this one needs to go as well. I feel bad that I'm like, I don't think I'll ever read this again, but it was a good book. Like when I read it, I gave it 4 stars. I don't feel any connection to it, so it's going. I've got a few contemporary books now and I love reading romance, but I'm also very picky. So not always are they going to be the ones for me. So one of them is Witch Please, and I know that it's a romance, but it's also on that kind of cusp of being a fantasy because it's about a witch falling in love with a human. But in this series, you can't talk about being a witch because it's outlawed by some council. And so if you can't tell your partner who you are, to me, that's not consent. And it is apparently addressed in this series in like book 3. But when I got to book 2, I didn't like it. I put it down. I read it while I was sick. It served its purpose and now it's time to let it go. I know some people struggle with unhauling books, but I genuinely find this really therapeutic. It's really freeing to just get rid of all your clutter, especially mentally, because you're not holding on to all of these stories anymore. You're like, oh, I can clear the rafters and clear the space for something new. Speaking of new, this was a new release and I did not like it as much as her adult works, and that is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert, which I read when it came out in January, and I honestly found the main character unbearable. The love interest with his OCD was way more interesting to me and he felt way more nuanced. I think I just like characters that have that genuine empathy for everyone else, and if they're caught up in their own head and are quite selfish and refusing to acknowledge certain issues about themselves so that they'll grow as characters, if they don't do those things, then I don't like them. And this character was very infuriating because she was very self-absorbed and didn't communicate very well, which is fair enough. Like, I know people like that, but like in my real life, that's a bit different compared to reading it as a parody in a book. Because they're teased out so much for the drama of the story, I just don't care about it. Similarly, in that young adult category is You Should See Me in a Crown. I had such high hopes for this because it is a sapphic romance with a prom queen rivalry. I thought this was going to be great with a lot of tension and banter, and it probably was, but I didn't end up continuing it because I just didn't like the tone of voice and the writing style of the story. It felt very surface level, and I get that I was just starting a book, so you'd expect it to be surface level when it's introducing everyone, but I just felt disconnected, so it's not staying. Also in that Read It or Unhaul It vlog that I mentioned before about a few others that I've recently gotten rid of is 1,000 Splendid Suns. I tried this in one of those reading vlogs and I thought the story of this would be great. It's fantastic, clearly. It's got so many awards, but it just makes my brain switch off. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the genre because it's more historical fiction. I just don't like that genre. And I thought I would hit out on a whim and go, I'm going to try something new and try something different. And honestly, sometimes that works. Like, I never read memoirs, but I read Tom Felton's memoir Beyond the Wand, 5 stars. I tried this, and I don't read historical fiction usually, just wasn't my thing. But I can respect that I, for the most part, like the writing style. I just don't like the subject matter. I'm sure it's a brilliant book, but it's just not my jam at all, which is why I'm getting rid of it. Another young adult one that I'm getting rid of. I won this, I enjoyed it, but I don't want to keep it, and that is Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell. This is about a boy falling in love with a boy, and they have this romance online that they're playing video games in. It's like their online personality. The main character thinks he knows something about this online persona, and so when he goes to this local theatre crew so that he can join in and become part of their production, he realizes that the person he's been talking to online is actually one of the people in this production. And so he tries to drive their romance without the other character realizing who he actually is. And so sometimes it brings this whole like realization of, oh my God, you are the person that I wanted this whole time, blah, blah. But in this book, it felt like heavy miscommunication to the point where I just don't like it. And while there were certain things that were resolved, I'm trying to be spoiler free here, it just rubbed me the wrong way in the sense that it went on too long. That's all I can really say about it without giving anything away. All right, we're down to the last couple. I'm sad because I really wanted to like this. I got 80% into this book and then I put it down. And I thought because of the cover, I would like it, which is a silly thing to think. But when you go into the fantasy genre, it's just like photographic images of a guy with a sword on a lot of books, or a landscape, like a fantasy landscape. This actually did something different, which I really thought would hook me, because I'm like, I could get into some characters with different dynamics. This is really like what that is portraying. It just bored me, which I feel bad about saying, but I tried to stick to it. I was like, no, this will interest me and that'll interest me and this dynamic will develop, and it didn't happen. But then something else happened that's like this book, and that is with The Black Tongue Thief. Like, look at these covers. Aren't they not amazing? And I DNF'd both of them. What is wrong with me? This one is supposed to have this rogue character that goes on this quest with somebody that he ticked off. And so already you've got that dynamic where they don't like each other. But when it came to the descriptions of all of the world building, it feels like there was a bit of character development and focus, and then it really got diverted and diluted, and then it went off in another direction. And so while you're trying to wrap your head around all the world building, the character has now gone this way, and you're like, hang on a second, like this feels very jarring. In trying to do or juggle so many beginnings of the facets of the story all at the same time, you've dropped me, like you've lost me, I don't care anymore. And I found it kind of frustrating to read because I couldn't connect to it. So yeah, I DNF'd this one as well. Speaking of letting it go to feel free again, I've got 4 books at the end of this video, and I'm really on the fence about whether I'll get rid of them or not, given that one of them is by one of my favorite authors and the other is a very popular fantasy series. I'm like, I might put them aside and then I'll decide later, because I like kind of letting my unhauled books sit there in the cupboard for a while so they're out of sight, out of mind. And if something piques my interest or my memory, or I change my mind, I can go to that cupboard and be like, no, I'll take this one back and put it back on my shelf. So at least that way they're like kind of unhauled, but they haven't physically left the premises yet. And that is the case with The Malevolent Seven by Sebastian de Castell. I did a review of this and it's all spoiler free, so feel free to go and watch that for more in-depth thoughts on what this actually is about. But the reason that I don't really want to keep this is because of the characters, I suppose, and the trajectory of this story. The plot felt really weak and the characters didn't have a strong enough dynamic. I think it comes back to something I briefly mentioned before about characters being a good person and having that empathy to them. You can start to see the gems of that, or the nubs of that, developing in this book. It's just not strong enough for me. And there's a whole cast of characters and I could not tell you who they are or what their backgrounds are, because while they are all very unique and have interesting things that they bring to the party, I don't care about them at all, and I don't really care about their interactions. I'm just going to put it aside and then see what I think in a few months' time. And then, you know, when you reread a book series or a book that used to be some of your favorites and they're just not anymore. I reread this trilogy, A Darker Shade of Magic, A Conjuring of Light, and A Gathering of Shadows, and I reread these because I wanted to gather all of my thoughts before going into The Fragile Threads of Power, and I've done a whole summary on all of these. And so I reread them not only to refresh my memory, but also to make that video so that anyone who's wanting to pick up Threads of Power and hasn't reread these in a while, you can now do that because I've summarized everything for you. And in doing that process, I realized that there is a lot of surface level character interaction. There's a lot of plot that just felt not very dynamic. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is silly. How did this make me feel so enthralled when I first read them? I gave this one probably a 4 stars, but these ones have been a 2 and then a 3 stars. All the way through when I first read this series, this was 4 stars and these were 5. And now I'm reading them and going, these characters and this situation in this plot is ridiculous. Am I going to read Fragile Threads of Power? I've honestly put the effort in to do that. So I'm going to try it and see how I feel, because V.E. Schwab's writing has grown significantly since this series. I just honestly don't know. Like, I've got so many copies of each of these books. Why am I holding on to them? This is a whole Nevernight situation all over again, because I collected everything in that series. Hardcovers, special editions, paperbacks that I got personalized and signed to me. I had arcs, everything. And now I'm like, I don't love that series anymore. And I can't reread it because it'll ruin the magic that I initially came to that series with. So I'm like, do I get rid of these? I think I might. So these ones and then the Malevolent Seven are kind of on the fence for me. So I'll leave that with your decision down below. Do you think I should get rid of them? I think I should. Anyway, I'm unhauling a ton of books. Let me know if you find unhauling easy or difficult. I'd be interested to know. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments. Help me decide. I really need help. But I'll see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.